From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. It was the first time in history a Kennedy was defeated in a congressional election in Massachusetts. Congressman Joe Kennedy lost to Senator Ed Markey in the Democratic primary by 10 points. It wasn't so long ago some people said Kennedy should run for president in 2020. Now he's about to leave elected office altogether. In a 12 News exclusive, my colleague and 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi sat down with Kennedy to talk about that defeat and his 8 years representing our region in the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts. Here now is Ted's interview with Congressman Joe Kennedy.
Congressman Kennedy, good to see you, obviously under somewhat strange conditions, but these are the times we're in.
Such as 2020.
Yeah,
so
exactly. It's good to see you. So I want to talk about your time representing our region in Congress, as well as your own future. But first, we do have to talk about the Senate campaign, as you probably expect. So, you know, for a while, polling showed you up double digits, and then it did start to tighten. And then obviously, in the end, it did not go your way. Was there a moment during the campaign when you realized, uh-oh, this is not going how I want it to go?
Ted, I always knew it was going to be a tough race. From the moment I got in it, our own internal numbers and everything else showed that it was going to be a tight race. And anytime you challenge an incumbent senator, an incumbent of any party, it's going to be a challenge. You're not just challenging that individual, you're challenging a system that has led to a status quo. And yeah, I think I thought we needed stronger leadership. I think we could do better. As you heard me say throughout the course of that campaign, I respect Senator Markey. I pledged my support to him on September 1st, that evening after the results came in. I supported him throughout the rest of that primary campaign, and I support him now. And I think that's what we as a party need to do, is particularly at this moment when there is so much challenge to our systems economically, culturally, socially. If you've got other ideas, if you think that you can do better, go out, campaign on it. Try to build that support. And if you fall short, then do everything you can to try to make sure the folks that actually that did succeed, that they're going to have the success that your constituents asked for and that they deserve. In
a different universe, though, you are almost certainly entering a new term in the House. Easily would have kept your seat. I don't think you were even opposed in the previous election. You know, was it a mistake to go for the bigger prize and not keep what you had?
No, I don't regret anything about that race. I don't regret my decision to enter it. I don't regret the campaign that we ran. I obviously wish the outcome were different. But Ted, for me, I do believe that there are major challenges, structural challenges that this year in 2020, because of COVID, because of the economic devastation that's come with it, that have highlighted the ways in which we fall short. And I think that if we're going to do the big, hard things that are necessary in order to deliver on the change that so many want, then I think new and different voices have to be at that table. That being said, I made my pitch. We fell short. I support Senator Markey, and I support a Democratic Party that is willing to actually do the hard work that is needed and necessary in every corner and community across our country, to actually make sure that those voices are heard and represented and that change is delivered. Because I do think whether it was displayed in our race, in that Senate race throughout that primary, and in a similar way, exhibited across the country in the results on November 3rd, we've got an awful lot of work ahead of us.
Do you think if there hadn't been a pandemic, you might have won? You have to wonder. You did not enter this campaign expecting to be wearing a mask, staying in I think you were in your attic a bunch of times doing interviews on Zoom. I mean, you know, it was a very different environment than you expected to be running in.
Look, the coulda, shoulda, woulda, if it was different, would have gotten a different result. That I'm not all that interested in getting into what would have happened if it didn't. And the reality is that, yes, the strength I think that I have on a campaign trail is being out with people, engaging in that person-to-person type of politics. We couldn't do that. That's fine. Senator Markey couldn't either, and other candidates couldn't either. And so that so much doesn't matter. I do think that what matters now for me, for a Democratic Party, for our country, is how we take the results of this election, learn the lessons of this election, the good, the challenges, and build forward to a stronger, more equitable, fairer country. Because we still see today the fact that across the board, whether it's with healthcare, whether it's still with COVID infection rates, whether it's with the responses to this virus, whether it's the economic devastation that's come with it, we still see enormous inequities across our society, and our system needs to address them.
When you got into this race, one of the things a lot of the reporters said often was we didn't see a ton of issue differences between you and Senator Markey. But in the end, you became the subject of a lot of criticism, more intense than I would have expected when the campaign started on the left of your party. Were you surprised by the level of criticism you took from progressives and from the left, especially later on in the campaign?
Yeah, look, I think it was, for somebody that is by any stretch of the definition of the word, a very strong progressive. And for many that have said there weren't major policy disagreements between myself and Senator Markey, and I pointed out many that actually I think put me to the left of Senator Markey, but regardless of that, I was surprised at the level of vitriol and the not even the critiques, but the attacks that came at me, that came at my family, that came at a number of members of my family. And, you know, look, I don't think that whether you're Democrat or Republican, I don't think there's a place for that in politics. It was eye-opening. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And look, I'm not the only one to have been on the receiving end of those types of attacks. But I will say that for those that wonder why politics has gotten so brutal and why the system doesn't work, if the idea of raising your hand and saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to put myself out there for evaluation in front of the public to be able to be tested and to put forth ideas. And if you get met with sustained and systemic attacks and threats, I'm not so sure that's a sign of a healthy democracy, and I'm not so sure that's really the system that we all want, and I'm certain we all can do better.
You mentioned your family, and all the years I've been covering you, I always would see you wince when we would start to ask you Kennedy family questions. Not that you were ashamed of your family or anything, but you preferred to be Joe over Joe Kennedy sometimes, I think. But late in the campaign, your campaign at least did start to really embrace your family legacy, talk about it more. You had an ad about it. I'm wondering, I guess, was that hard for you? It was certainly different from how you'd run and how you'd presented yourself to the public in the years before. I'm just curious how you thought that through.
Ted, you know me, you've covered me for almost a decade. I think I am very proud of my family and the contributions that they've made. I think it was incredibly important, and I think I hope that I showed over the course of my 8 years of representation of the 4th District of Massachusetts that while I am proud of my family, that I also needed to run as me, and that the folks in the 4th District were going to get me as a representation in Congress, not my father, my grandfather, or one of his brothers or sisters for that matter. I tried to run that Senate campaign the same way. Unfortunately, from my perspective, others made members of my family a centerpiece to that race and tried to redefine their contribution to our Commonwealth and our country, which I found puzzling, I guess, to say the least, given the contributions that they have made. And so I did not seek to make my family an issue. Others did. And if they wanted to try to muddy the water as to their contributions as a way to attack me, then I felt that it was right, and I had an obligation to try to set the record straight about what they had done and the meaning of those contributions. I certainly don't regret that. I wish that this could have been a race where we were evaluated and analyzed off of our own personal records and vision and values and the way in which we believe that the Senate needed to move forward and push our country forward. That being said, welcome to politics. And, you know, I respect Senator Markey. I respect the contribution that he has made to our Commonwealth and our country. And I supported him over the course of the rest of that primary, of the general election, and look forward to supporting him over the course of the next 6 years in the U.S. Senate.
It was like a root canal. One more question on the primary, and then we'll move on. A few weeks after the election, your campaign revealed there had been $1.5 million in misspending of dollars earmarked for the general election during the primary. When and how did you find out that had been done?
I found out about improper spending a couple days after the campaign ended, and
The primary campaign?
yes, the primary campaign ended, and we took immediate action to remedy it. We've come into full compliance, and we'll make sure that we do everything we can to stay that way.
And you didn't at any moment say to yourself, where is this money coming from? I thought we were running low or anything like that.
I became aware of the issues again a couple days after the campaign ended, the primary campaign ended, and we've done everything we can to come into compliance and self-reported those the issues there, and look forward to obviously making sure everything's done right and moving past it.
All right, let's talk about your time representing the 4th District, which is coming to an end now. First, what do you consider your biggest accomplishment as a congressman in the 8 years you represented the 4th?
Ted, I'm really proud of my leadership on healthcare and protecting the Affordable Care Act and trying to expand access to healthcare across the country, particularly with regards to mental and behavioral health. It's been one of my major areas of focus. I've authored probably about a dozen or more bills targeting specific populations, specific constituencies across our country, and trying to make sure that people get access to the care that they need when they need it. I'm really proud of my leadership on LGBT issues, particularly on transgender issues. I'm the head of the Transgender Equality Task Force in Washington. And the leadership that I've shown on issues around our economy, trying to make sure that what we've seen, and I think much of the discussion that you're hearing of late, is around this erosion of economic power, this inability of a middle-class job to deliver a middle-class life, and the challenges that so many families are feeling, even if you've been fortunate enough to hold on to your job through the midst of a pandemic, with the increased costs of housing, of healthcare, of education, early childcare. It means that people just aren't able to provide for the families the way that other generations used to. That has to change, and I've been on the forefront of that debate across the country. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly though, is the level of constituent service that we've been able to provide across the 4th District. I made a habit of being out and about this district a lot. It's an incredible place to be. The communities from Fall River and Taunton across the southern part of Bristol County up to the areas closer to Boston. It has an enormous amount to offer, not just our Commonwealth, but our country. I was incredibly honored to give the response to President Trump's first State of the Union at Diamond Vocational School, and to really center the voices of focus of the people of Fall River in this discussion, in this debate going forward. And so that's going to be probably the biggest part of this job that I'm going to miss.
What was your biggest mistake?
There's a lot of them, Ted. Thanks for calling them out. Look, I think literally there's issues that we made, and mistakes that we made probably every day. Obviously, over the course of the campaign, I wish we'd won. But over the course of...
It was a mistake to lose.
Yeah, mistake to lose, right? Don't lose. The biggest part that I think I would suggest that a party and obviously a representative of our democracy needs to do even more so going forward is try to provide a space for people across our country and our communities to be able to listen and learn. Right? One of the tensions that you feel in the realities that you feel in representing a district like the 4th District is the economic diversity, but the narrative around some of those issues that come with it. So yes, a consensus across the district of the need to address climate change and the fact that it is real and it is an existential threat to our country. But let's not get bogged down in an oversimplification as to what that means, particularly for a southern part of the district whose history and economy is still very much tied to issues or industries like advanced manufacturing, where a higher energy bill might mean an inconvenience to a family living outside of Boston. It is devastating to a business that is providing a lifeline to 12, 14, 16, 20 employees in Bristol County. And trying to make sure that, one, we address those policies to confront climate change, to make sure that some of those voters that are so active and engaged in that fight also recognize that we're going to do so in a way with these other communities at the table and not view it as a threat to their way of life. Because it's that tension that I think ends up leading to some of the polarization and the vitriol that we see across our system today.
It was interesting, as I also covered the race to succeed you in Congress, since your races were never very competitive, I spent more time thinking about the diversity of the 4th District, and I obviously look out for the bottom half, that is where I represent for television. You know this area well now, Fall River, the Attleboro's, Taunton, as well as the northern part, close to Boston you mentioned. What do you think holds back, after thinking about it for 8 years, talking to leaders, business leaders, et cetera? Do you have any new insights or anything that really stayed with you about why it's been hard for Fall River or the South Coast to advance economically anywhere near the way we see in Greater Boston?
Look, I think a big part of that is two main factors. One, the lack of willingness for policymakers that are focused on the major economic engine of the region, which is Boston, to just continue to focus on the issues that plague Boston and not realize that communities like Fall River, like New Bedford, like Taunton and the Attleboroughs provide opportunity for growth that can strengthen Boston, not just take away resources from it. And it is that shift in thinking that I think is so needed and necessary. In order for that to happen, you need folks that are able to make the case to some of those folks on Beacon Hill and in Washington, D.C.
So you think that's real, the feeling down here sometimes that this area gets overlooked?
Oh, 100%.
As people focus on Boston. You, as someone who talks to both sides, so to speak.
100% it gets overlooked. Boston has the worst commute in the country, pre-COVID, had the worst commute in the country. It was the 3rd most gentrified city in the nation. What that means is people that actually power the city, that work in the city, can't afford to live there anymore. So they get priced further and further out, and so the commutes in get worse and worse. Well, if you actually were able to make good on an investment like South Coast Rail, now all of a sudden, Route 24 is in a disaster every morning. I talked to dozens of people over the course of this campaign who were involved in the construction industry, lived in New Bedford, would get on the road by 5 a.m. to get up Route 24 when they could actually, so they can make it to work on time. Because if you leave at 6, you just spend 2.5 hours on the road. Right? This has been going on year after year after year. It's one of the main reasons why 6 years ago, we actually launched a regional economic development strategy that I engaged with Congressman David Cicilline, former mayor of Providence, represents the border district. And what we recognized and what we tried to do was to say, hey, a lot of those interconnections already exist. People from Fall River will go to Providence, go to the mall, go to Providence, go to the movies when we used to be able to go to the movies, right? Federal policy hasn't adapted to strengthen those connections. And so one, it's a recognition from leaders in Washington, D.C. and in Beacon Hill and in Providence of the fact that other regions around Boston have an awful lot to contribute to the growth of an economic vitality of the region. The second is for them to recognize some of the connections that are already there and have federal policy behind it to strengthen it. And that was at the core of a lot of the work that we had done to try to create and strengthen those regional economic partnerships.
Before I get to a few final questions about your future, we're talking about we're focused very much on, understandably, on the elections around here, but I'm curious what your take. It was a very disappointing election night for your current colleagues in the House, especially after I know you spent a lot of time in 2018 winning the majority back, and you were kind of busy with your own thing this cycle, but you saw the results, and you had losses for House Democrats. And now you've seen, Connor Lamb and AOC are fighting in the New York Times about who's got a better strategy. I mean, all these people, politics. Where do you come down on this debate over, is the lefty side of the party, making it harder to win in the more swing districts? You know the debate I'm talking about. Where do you come down on it?
I think it's an oversimplified debate, right? And I think, like often in politics, particularly these days, we look for quick slogans or quick labels to be able to define something that's extremely complex. This is hard, and this is complex. I think there's a number of factors that contribute to it. One, Ted, if you'll recall, back in 2018, we actually overperformed. We won some seats that no one actually thought that we would pick up, that House Democrats would pick up and win. Part of this is probably a bit of a reversion to that mean or to what was more normal. Two, without doubt, across the board, there's a bump for Donald Trump. When he is on the ballot, he drew out and draws out more people. we saw that in reflective of polling that showed a stronger case for Democrats in a number of these districts. Republicans had that too. Republican leadership did not think they were going to win some of these seats. So it came as a surprise on folks on both sides of the aisle. It's not like Democrats somehow miscalculated this and Republicans had it right. Nobody, or everybody was surprised by it. But I think the broader point here is we have to recognize that the country itself is in the midst of a massive transition, economically, demographically, socially, culturally. And in the midst of that transition, you've got parties that are trying to evolve to understand where not just their bases are, but where the country's going. And in the midst of that evolution and in the midst of that change, you have elections that are going to muddy these waters and show a bit of a confused country and confused map. That's, I think, what we're seeing. And so does greater investment in a digital strategy that can hyper target and message key messages to local constituencies, does that matter? Absolutely, 100%. Yes, it does. And I think that is, we would be wise to invest more in that in our future. Is it true then that in the midst of that transition, that if there are those out there that seek to take messages that are tailored for, or the messages that speak to some of characteristics of one district and then use those to apply to the characteristics of another in both directions? Yeah, that's what oppositions and opponents are going to do. And so we've seen that as well. Is there a quick solution to that? No. The long-term solution to that is local, on-the-ground organizing in every single community across the country. You do not leave anybody behind. The moment a Democratic Party says to the folks in rural West Virginia or Kentucky or across the Rust Belt, or by the way, in inner city Boston or in the south side of Chicago or in Miami, hey, there's people here that we can't reach, that is the moment that we sign our own ticket to the minority in perpetuity. I do not doubt that it is going to be hard to do that in some of these communities and across this country, but that is the work that is needed. That is the work that we need, that is necessary. And you got to roll up your sleeves and dive on in. And I think, and I hope the Democratic Party is taking that lesson from this election and willing to put in the effort to change it.
So January 3rd, you'll be a private citizen. What do you do next?
Will be. Good question. I'm still wrestling with that and figuring it out. I have spent more time with 2 little kids than I have in a very long time, so that's been fun. More time around the house, which has been great. There's probably more crooked shelves than I would like to admit now that there's some home improvement projects that I said that I would take a hammer to, which my wife has said that's not what she meant by home improvement projects. So we've got some time to figure that out yet. Look, I think the part that I'm focused on at the moment is representing the 4th District for the past 8 years has been the honor of my professional life, without question. There are parts of this job that I'm really going to miss. There are parts of this job that I won't. It's finding the series of ways in which I can take the parts that I will miss and channel my efforts in advocacy, through different pathways to try to stay active on those issues, on inequities, whether that's economic or in the health sector, trying to focus on access to mental and behavioral health care, trying to make sure that this country makes good on a promise and ideal that here everybody gets a shot. And even today, we don't. And I believe in a country that makes that promise and executes on it. So I've got still some more thinking to do to figure out exactly the way that works, but look forward to finding ways to make that next contribution and spend a little bit more time with my family because they deserve it, and I look forward to it. Have
you had any conversations about going to the Biden administration?
I've had a bunch of conversations with folks from a Biden team. Look, if there's ways that I can contribute to that, great. I also, I like my home, and Massachusetts is home. It's where Laura and I are raising our family, and I'm hopeful that this next chapter in my life means a little bit less time on an airplane than the last 8 years. And so, if there's ways that I can be supportive of a Biden-Harris administration, obviously I'd love to be and would be an honor. I'm also looking forward to spending some more time in the Bay State.
Do you think you'll run for office again?
I'm not sure, right? I think if there's, at the moment, I put everything out there over the course of the last campaign. I'm proud of the race that I ran. I'm proud of the support that we were able to earn across the state. I think now is a time for me to spend some more time with my family, to figure out how I can continue to find ways to contribute. And if those opportunities come up again, we'll evaluate them when they do. I wouldn't say never to anything, but I'm looking forward to this next chapter.
Last question. You see a lot of people got very energized on both sides of the aisle in the last 4 years by everything going on in the country. As someone who's seen politics at the highest level and also has tried to, have a grassroots, feel out there, what do you recommend to someone who wants to get involved and make a difference? What do you? How does an average person, someone not named Kennedy, how do they make a difference?
Every day, and I think what people lose sight of, although I think this is changing, is the fact that while these big fights take place in Washington, D.C., and these the result of these big movements, the changes that can be felt every day, the quality of your child's school, access to early affordable childcare, the access to healthcare, a lot of that's going to be decided by local elections, by local school boards, by local state representatives, and by mayors. And so if you break this system down, there's ways that every single person can contribute to that system, again, every single day. And whether that's getting involved in some local community organizations, political or not, whether it's getting involved in local campaigns, on either side of the aisle, I do believe that the more engaged that our electorate is, that our society is, the better off we're going to be. And I hope people will, because I do think that that's what essentially this moment calls for, is the country to come to have a big, long family discussion to come to a consensus. And family discussions don't mean they're not heated and don't mean they're not passionate. What they mean is that we recognize that we've got bonds that link us, whether we want them to or not. The words of my great friend and the late John Lewis, we might have come here in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And we got to figure this out. So grab an oar.
Congressman Joe Kennedy, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Congressman Joe Kennedy for sitting down with us. If you missed any of Ted's interview, it's online right now at WPRI.com. I also want to mention a Target 12 investigation we ran on Thursday. Nowhere to go. We revealed as of November there were 22 kids under DCYF care at Bradley Hospital who, for various reasons, including the pandemic, have been stuck there, some for months. And we've learned they have not been receiving a formal education as required by law. That investigation, too, is online right now on WPRI.com. I'm Tim White. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week on Newsmakers.